Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the December 14th, 2023 meeting of the Lower Downtown Design Review Commission. We'll get started this morning with some commissioner introductions. Go ahead and start with Craig.
Craig Lawrence, business owner operator.
Duckett Emke, preservation architect.
Greg Lick, property owner.
Heather Vasquez Johnson, practicing architect and LDDRC chair.
Amy Scanforn, preservation architect.
Jim Gravier, resident.
And I'm Brittany Bryant, Denver Landmark Preservation staff.
Great, thank you. So starting off our meeting this morning, we have a meeting record from November 2nd, 2023 to review. Does any commissioner have any comments, changes, edits for staff on that meeting record? I am not seeing any, so I think we can accept the meeting record as is. Okay, moving in, we'll get started on our agenda today. For anybody joining us virtually, please see the screen for audio tips for participating virtually on our Zoom meeting today. If you can't hear anything, please check your audio settings, add a background noise suppression, test your speaker and microphone. We do have a fair number of people here in the building, so we'll assume that our presenters are all in person, but if there's any public comment on Zoom today, when it's your turn to speak, to mute or unmute, use that microphone button at the bottom of the screen. You'll have additional options if you expand that menu, and then if you still have audio challenges, try switching to phone for audio. And as we get in for public comment, you can raise your hand on the Zoom meeting to let staff know that you would like to comment, and they will let you into the meeting. Morning, Tom. Okay, so today the only item that we have on the agenda is a discussion item. So our process today, I'll announce what that discussion item is. We'll have a presentation from staff to introduce the item. We have a applicant presentation, correct?
Yep.
Okay, so after that point, we'll have an applicant presentation. We'll open it up, see if there's any additional public comment, and then we will discuss the item that is on the board today. So today, as it's just a discussion item, there will be no action and no vote taken today. So with that, I would like to introduce the Wine Coop Crossing project and Abby.
I'll give you your remote control access. And check your screen.
Okay. Okay, good morning, everyone. So just wanted to give you a little bit of background before we discuss the Wine Coop Crossing today, so you have an idea of kind of what the review process is going to look like. This one is a little bit tricky because it extends over 2 different historic districts with 2 different commissions involved. So let's see if I can actually. Come on screen. There we go. So we've already had a discussion at the LPC. So coming to you today to loop you into what is going to be a very interesting review process. So as you can see here, on the left, you have the boundaries of the Spear Boulevard Historic District, and then on the right, the boundaries of the Lower Downtown Historic District. So we have 2 kind of the proposed Wine Coop Crossing Bridge extends over 2 jurisdictions. So the portion that is in the Spear Boulevard Historic District will go to the LPC for review. The portion that is within the Lower Downtown Historic District would go to you for review. So I just want to talk a little bit today, because these are not areas that either commission deals with a whole lot, kind of what the existing guidelines are that would, what your basis for review would be, and kind of a little bit about what that review process would look like. So Interestingly, both the Lower Town Down Historic District and the Spear Boulevard Historic District were both designated in 1958. So Cherry Creek and the adjacent parcels from Larimer to Wawata are within the Lodo district. So the boundaries are a little kind of odd as far as what was incorporated into the Spear district versus what was incorporated into the Lodo district. So this project would fall within the Special Review District 4 of the Lodo district in sub areas 5 and 6. So review would be based on the designation application, the ordinance, design guidelines for the Lower Downtown Historic District, as well as then much more specifically, the design guidelines for Special Review District 4. So the general design guidelines for Lower Downtown really don't address much as far as this type of construction. They do have general guidance on new construction, which would be applicable. So things like buildings shall be designed such that their massing is consistent and compatible with the historic context, and a building's materials, details, and colors are important factors in establishing its compatibility with its context. The design guidelines for the 4th Special Review District are going to provide a lot more specific guidance for this site. So the vision statement is really kind of looking at the big picture for the 4th Special Review District, and it says that the district should really kind of look holistically at the whole Cherry Creek and Spear Boulevard. So that important characteristics integral to the experience of Spear Boulevard be furthered through the development of these parcels, and that new construction should emphasize the continuity of the parkway environment, as well as providing connections beyond the parkway edges to the neighboring urban context of the historic district, Cherry Creek, and the Auraria campus. So though you will be specifically reviewing what is within the footprint of the district, these guidelines kind of do say that you should be kind of looking larger for how the connectivity is, kind of proposed, looking at connections to Spear Boulevard and across your area and downtown. So it kind of gives you that scope, even though you'll only be reviewing a portion of it, you can kind of look to see how you think it's fitting within that larger scope. And the guidelines do then specifically say that when you're thinking about context, the context shall not be limited solely to contributing buildings in the Lower Downtown Historic District. That when you're thinking about context, you can also be thinking about Cherry Creek, Spear Boulevard, connections to Auraria, as well as the Lower Down Historic District. So you're not just limited to thinking about Lodo when you're thinking about what's compatible and how it's relating to the context. And the guidelines do say then that new construction shall include considerations of relative scale, proportion, refinement, complexity, and that contemporary materials and details, new construction should be compatible with and complementary to the existing historic features of relevant structures, as well as the district as a whole. So then just to give you a little bit of idea of how the rest of the project will be reviewed and the guidelines for the Spear portion. So as I said, Spear Boulevard Historic District was also designated in 1988. It extends from First Avenue down by the Country Club up to Urban Street in Highlands. And it has a period of significance from 1904 through 1957. And for the Spear Boulevard Historic District, the LPC will be looking at the designation application, the ordinance, their general design guidelines, and then they do also have specific guidelines for Spear Boulevard and Cherry Creek. And these design guidelines were developed in conjunction with the designation and were adopted by LPC in 1988. But they haven't gotten a whole lot of use so far. Because it hasn't been a lot proposed. So the vision for these guidelines is that the purpose of establishing design guidelines for this significant and historic parkway is to revitalize the civic and historic quality of the boulevard and to ensure that this quality is restored and maintained over time. So the guidelines say specifically that these are the key character defining features of the boulevard that should either be retained or restored where they're missing. That the boulevard should be linear, formal in character, uniform, that there should be a series of promenades, that there should be a pedestrian scale, that water should remain a prominent feature, and that the design should be classically influenced. So some of the key guidelines from those Spear Boulevard guidelines: any work should maintain, enhance, and revitalize the historic classical image, exemplified by the City Beautiful movement. The overall character design and maintenance should be consistent and uniform and should reinforce the image of the parkway as part of the historic Denver Park and Parkway system. And that, the boulevard should maintain a uniform pattern both within the site and in relation to the design and the park and the parkway system. So those guidelines talk a lot about how it should continue to read as a unified linear resource, that it shouldn't be broken up into sections that have different character, but it should all have that City Beautiful character. So that is it, just kind of quick overview there. When I talked to the commission about this, the commission is really interested in seeing how some of the reviews, though each group will be reviewing it separately, how each commission could kind of at least hear what the other is thinking. And so we're looking, we'll be working with Adam and Nate to see how, there are some options to be able to call a joint meeting. So we may be looking at doing some a joint meeting so that some of the presentations and discussion could be heard as a whole, like with both commissions, and then the commissions could divide up, and have their own, their own their own decisions, but if they could hear some of the same information. So we're still exploring what exactly our options are under ordinance and what exactly that would look like, but the commission is really interested. They really would like to be able to have, an opportunity for both commissions to be together to discuss this. Any questions for me about the process or the guidelines?
Thank you. My first question was about whether we could do joint meetings, and I just want to voice my support for that, because I would hate to put the project team in a position where they're getting conflicting approvals, and that could draw it on for months and months. One question I have for staff is, how does this potentially limit future Spear Boulevard possibilities? I know that CPD and Dottie have been doing some work on this currently and presenting some stuff the other day publicly. How does this align with that work currently underway?
So the work that's being done, the vision study for Cherry Creek and Spear, is just a vision study, so it's looking at options. I mean, certainly if this goes ahead, then that may push that vision study in a different, what comes out of that. That vision study is looking to wrap up they're hoping to have a final report by February. I'm trying to get them to come here and talk to you, hopefully at your January meeting, so that you can also get a presentation from the consultant team that's working on that vision study. And I think they would be, a little better able to tell you about that. But the vision study is really looking at kind of what are practical options for the city to be looking at, and how the corridor can be improved. So it's kind of meant to be a basis for future city work, but isn't proposing anything, isn't on its own going to lead to future projects.
And one other process question, and that is, in some of the guidelines, we see references to buildings, and I'm not sure if this structure meets the definition of a building, or if is that a problem? Is there any concern about applying criteria which specifies buildings in it, that could leave us open to challenge?
I think when it's talking generally about buildings, I think not, when you're talking about buildings, as in it should be, this articulation, this, obviously those don't really apply. But I think when it's just talking about buildings, as in, kind of new construction should have compatibility in materials or compatibility or fit the context. I think that could be generally, interpreted to include any new construction. We just often say building instead of saying new construction. But yeah, that is certainly something you can discuss.
And we do use those terms interchangeably in our office. And we've tried to bring some clarity to that in recent years, but we've kind of used building and structure interchangeably in the past.
And just to also clarify, there was some thought at the beginning of this will be going through an encroachment process and what exactly the commission's role would be, but I have spoken to chief building official who said that this will require permits. So, this will be required, we'll have to go through the regular permitting process as well as the encroachment process. So it will require both a certificate of appropriateness, both from the LPC and the LGDRC.
Thank you.
Any more questions for staff? Jim?
Question here, we've talked internally on a number of occasions about how we relate to the traffic flow, especially with all the changes that have occurred in Lodo recently. My question is really, are we now broadening our role in looking at those things, or are we not? And related question is, to what extent are we as a commission to be looking at those particular issues as they apply to specific areas?
I mean, I think traffic specifically would be outside of your purview. It is part of what the study is looking at that the city's doing. But certainly the guidelines do say that you should be looking, at connectivity. So the fact that there is a bridge, that how it's connecting, so I think there's some gray areas there, but the guidelines do say that, you should be thinking about connectivity to, Cherry Creek, Spear, Auraria, Lodo. So there is some thought of that there.
Yeah, there's an awful lot of gray areas
Yes,
there.
there is.
Yeah, our purview would still be the structure, not the flow of traffic and things of that nature.
Again, there's gray areas in that, especially with all the restriping that's going on
Yeah.
downtown.
And this is a pedestrian bridge, so I think you'd be looking more at like.
Well, is that one of the guidelines? Are we to be primarily focused on the pedestrian movement? Or is that outside, that? kind
Yeah,
of
it's
issue?
it's a little tricky because lower downtown is the only district where we have some purview over the right of way. But still, that's more like the sidewalk and things of that nature, which is more pedestrian oriented. We have no purview over the right of way anywhere in the city. And if Dottie wants to make changes, sometimes they come to us and we make recommendations, but sometimes those recommendations don't go anywhere.
But we do have an overview that conflicts with the city's overview at times. Fortunately, it doesn't all the time. Sometimes it does.
Just a little bit, like with the redoing of the alleys and the sidewalks, but nothing really on the street in terms of traffic.
But again, just to push this a little further, but the city's responsible for the street. Understand that. However, the street right of way is 25% of the available right of way or downtown. So we can't help but not get involved in that to some extent. And that's where, as you know, we've had issues come up before.
Sure.
So I think that this may be a time to either settle it or argue it or.
Well, I don't think Dottie is gonna give us any authority.
No, Department of Transportation Infrastructure has authority over the right of way through the charter of the city. So in order to change that, you'd have to change the
Does
charter.
that include sidewalks?
Yes, the sidewalk is part of the right of way.
Very good. Thank you.
Question, our special review district guidelines ask us to look at scale and proportion. Can you give any guidance on how that relates to proposed building? Such as the scale and proportion of the work that's proposed across the sphere for the new concert venue and hotel. Can we take that into consideration when we consider the scale of this bridge?
No, it's really just asking when I think it's more you should take in proportion scale when you're thinking about scale to the district. So you're thinking more about, you can think about, is it going to relate to other contexts? But when you're thinking about scale, I think it's really asking you to think of what is the scale within the Lodo district. How does the scale relate to?
And only to existing construction, not necessarily proposed.
I mean, generally, you're looking at the, scale of the proposed construction to what's existing.
So here we have two phases of proposed. We have the proposed bridge and then proposed construction across Spear and proposed construction that we recently reviewed for the new building that's going in. Can we take into consideration all the proposed in its entirety, or should we just look at what's there today?
I think you can look at the entirety of particular like known projects in the district. Those are more known to us.
Yes.
The ones across Spear in the ball arena area, like that's still very theoretical
Okay.
at this point. It's likely happening, but there's more assurances for some things that are inside the district. There is a 375-foot tower that can be built in the 4th Special Review District. It keeps coming back and then going away. So I think that's something you can consider too, but there are options where you're also can develop that site and it not be 375-foot towers. So it's hard to say specifically when it's more theoretical.
Understood.
Yeah, and this is an interesting way where the LPC is a little bit different from the LDDRC, because the LPC will be looking at specifically just, is it compatible with the Spear Boulevard district will be there. So it's a little, but yeah, your guidelines do give you, can say that you can look a little bit more broadly in context. So it's kind of an interesting interplay there.
Excellent, thank you.
Well, related question, both to yours and to others that I know are going to be asked. How does the city's work on moving Spear Boulevard to the south side play into all of this?
That's a good question to ask the applicant, I think.
Okay, fair enough.
Any for Andy?
Our review is limited to only what's in the boundary of the lower downtown special review district, correct? So if it bridges over Spear, that's
The
mostly,
part where it goes, so basically as it's currently proposed, you would be looking at the ramping structure that goes up.
Correct.
LPC will be looking at the actual bridge structure over Spear.
correct. I know that this group will try and get into that. I'm like, that's outside of our purview. We're looking at the ramping structure and the bridge over, I call it a creek
Yes.
because I'm from St. Louis and that's a river. And the creek.
Yes,
So that's
that will
it.
be, yeah,
That is our limit.
yes.
But we can take into consideration.
We can, but I think any kind of proposals need to be limited to that part. We can't comment, really, once it leaves our district, I think we should limit our discussion. We can make recommendations, but I don't think anything we say on that bridge over Spear
It's not binding,
is not binding.
absolutely. But-
And that is why we're trying to have a joint meeting again,
Yes.
so you can hear all the comments. But we'll see where that goes.
And likely if LPC tries to comment on our corkscrew, we will have words.
Andy's ready to fight. All right.
I'm ready to fight. I know where these commissions go and I just want to limit our conversations.
Do we have any more questions for staff? I would like to invite the applicant to make their presentation. And as always, if you could start with your name and addresses for the record, please.
Chris is 1550 Winship and Rockhorse to my right. Ken Resnick, Matt Riley to my left. That's the Director of Development for Crockett Sport. I think some of you know, this team has been involved
Chris,
in.
sorry. So infill construction within lower downtown can have up to 15 minutes. If you want to agree. Do you guys need a full 15 minutes?
Thank you.
I'll let you know after he's done.
Okay, I'm gonna pull the 15-minute timer.
I think that that's appropriate since we're not taking action. So,
I think as some of you know, this is the team that's been involved with River Mile and now all the planning, the urban design, and ultimately the design of phase one, which you have a small glimpse of. Your questions are all good questions. I think this is going to be an interesting conversation for that. We wondered about this review process since we began the design of this crossing. And I think at least from our point of view, the way to look at this is it's one connection that influences everybody. It influences downtown, it influences everyone who will live in the Ball and River Mile neighborhoods. It also influences the Area Higher Education Center. We've worked with them extensively. We've also met with a number of the stakeholders, property owners, and the Lower Downtown District and Lower Downtown Neighborhood Association. So there has been an outreach process for this project. I think it's important to recognize the importance of this, and in fact, the purpose of it. There's a need today for a safe crossing over Spear Boulevard. I emphasize safe. Those of you who have been to events know what I'm talking about. So there is a need now. If you then add to that our phase one development, which we're not, for obvious reasons, going to discuss in detail today, that's another purpose for this, is to connect that first phase, which will then evolve into additional phases. And River Mile and Ball together represent zoning represents approximately 24 million new square feet as a new neighborhood for downtown. And that equates to 20,000 new residents, possibly 23,000 office workers. And that's significant. So that adds to the volume of the pedestrians and bicycles that will utilize this connection. The existing at-grade connections simply don't work due to the safety issues. And then we all know about the 5280 trail, and this is an important component of the 5280 trail. Probably the most significant first segment to be built, which then connects. And I think probably you understand that Wynkoop is part of that 5280 trail. And if you think of this in the big picture, this crossing connects the ballpark, Edmond Union Station, McGregor Square, what I think is one of the great streets in America, Wynkoop, across Cherry Creek and across Spear Boulevard, into our first phase and the Ball Arena, the build out of this phase. And then we are also proposing crossings over the consolidated main line, which connect the stadium neighborhood and eventually Sun Valley. So think of it as a cross axis which connects everything within that corridor. And of course, we're also connecting to the Area Higher Education Center, and we expect that they will be using this crossing as well because it's the safest crossing. That's just an overview. There's an awful lot to discuss about everything outside of this crossing. We're focused on the crossing today. I'm going to let Andy Rockmore discuss the design, the conceptual design of the crossing. We really look forward to your comments today. We recognize we're on new ground. As we've said before, this is I think we can look at this as being a really interesting exercise for design review, and I hope we can make it pleasurable. Andy?
Thank you. Brittany, we can go to the next, thank you.
This graphic is showing both the crossing and to your left, what we are planning on the phase one construction. And you can see some of the uses. And we're showing you the componentry here of a bridge, which, as we all have been discussing, crosses many contexts, and that is incredibly interesting. And because of the scale of not only phase one, but of the ball arena development that Chris just described, it's really three primary contexts: the Lodo Historic District, the Spear Parkway, and the ball arena development. And there are many ways, of course, to design a bridge, but what we're seeking to do here is to achieve a continuity that can be a continuous experience and have a consistent identity as it tries to unite three very disparate contexts. Next slide. As it crosses Spear, the primary identity of Spear, in some ways of our downtown environment, is the family of arches that already exists. As I said, there are many ways to design a bridge, but we believe that this structural system is the most appropriate to reflect the identity and continue the identity of the Spear Parkway as we cross. Next slide. And you can see it here, that one way that we achieve this clear span of 160 feet is an arch similar to the other arches of Spear. One of the things that we're doing that has been critical, a critical component, an objective of ours, is to allow future changes on Spear that we've all discussed, perhaps different movements of vehicles and pedestrians without getting in the way. So allow the flexibility over time. So we are free spanning the 160-foot right of way without any structure in the middle coming down on the median. And this arch allows us to do that. On the ball arena side, we land approximately 23 feet above the Spear environment, so that services and other activities will happen below and can be out of sight. In the ball district, all of those, it's a very unique site with unique constraints, and this allows us to almost create sort of a backdoor where we do not have alleys and other service areas. On the left, which we're all here to discuss, is a sloped ramp, which is sloped just under 5% to allow a universal access without elevators. There are no elevators proposed to access this bridge. There are stairs and ramps on both sides. And hopefully what this slide depicts is really the lightest touch possible in all of these environments. We've discussed the characteristics here today a little bit of the Lodo Historic District, which are primarily masonry, load-bearing buildings. We believe that this structure, being as light and thin as possible, allows those structures to remain the identity of the district. Next slide. I'll try and go through these quickly. This describes the componentry of the bridge. The capacity that Chris mentioned requires a pretty significant width of a structure. And we're proposing two 18-foot wide pathways, not designated. Both are allowable for pedestrians and bicyclists, and scooters, and are fully accessible, rather than combining them into a 136-foot wide pathway, which can achieve the capacity of many thousands of people leaving an event. We have intentionally pulled them apart to allow more daylight, less obstruction to the environment, the qualitative environment of the Spear Parkway. We've talked about the bridge, and then what we lovingly call the paperclip, or we know other people call it the corkscrew, is the tightest possible ramp which can also comply with certain municipal code turning criteria, meaning that there are radiuses that allow a bicyclist or a scooter to ride up comfortably. As I mentioned, it's less than 5%, so we do not require landings, and a central stair. And then finally, over the creek, the capacity does not exist with the existing Manny's Trestle Bridge, so we are adding to that, but with as light and thin as a crossing as possible. In a sense, a sidewalk, an 18-foot wide sidewalk with a railing on each side. It happens to cross the creek, but yet it is as visually minimal as possible. Next slide. Thank you. This is just showing it all together and gives you a sense of the continuity of context of Spear, which crosses below. And as we sit between the Volker Lofts on the Lodo side and the children's playground, which we can discuss in more detail as we move forward. Next slide. We have some before and afters. This is looking towards the mountains along Spear. You can see on the left the existing conditions. It's been critical to not interrupt that parkway environment. The landscape median, which is so characteristic of Spear, and also land appropriately on both sides while allowing not only the existing pedestrian realm, but to allow for its expansion in the future. Next. This shows the existing conditions around the paperclip. We are setting both the stairway directly on access with Wynkoop and a prominent overlook point which just sticks its nose out over the creek to look up and down, so that one is connected as much as possible, both visually and physically, to this rich environment. The arch is also directly on access with Wynkoop, so that the bridge acts as a wayfinding device while in the Lodo district. It can be as visible as possible down the rights of way. Next. Again, looking to the west, you can see the continuity of landscape and different ways in which the landing on the ball arena side has been carefully crafted to attract people to the right places. What was shown on another slide is an example of that is bringing people down stairways along the paths of pedestrian travel, not vehicular. So the stairways will come down and connect to the existing sidewalks, the more lateral movement, rather than coming down from the bridge and putting one directly into the traffic flow. Next slide. This again shows what we hope you will agree is as light of a touch as possible: a singular arch, a splayed deck, which can allow as much light as possible, and then a concrete cast ramping system with minimal vertical support to increase visibility both across the crossing, but certainly what is primary importance, as Chris mentioned, is the safety around this bridge, which is enhanced by visual connections and accessibility throughout. Next slide. You want to touch on this, Chris?
I think Abby mentioned, discussed these are we actually have 3 jurisdictions, by the way. We have a Denver Design Review Board review for everything we're doing on ball. That's what you see in pink. That makes it even more interesting and fun. So I won't go into the detail of this. I think Abby covered it adequately. I'm sure you'll have some discussion. I do agree, and we agree, that a joint review, although sort of unprecedented, would be helpful, because the point here is to do a great project. And whatever it takes to do that, we're on board with. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions for the applicant? Fred?
I do have one question. The parcel that the paperclip is proposed on, in looking at it, I did have a question about whether that site is developable otherwise. It looks like the access is fairly limited.
Well, it's a city property now.
Okay.
So I think it's true. Stick my neck out. I think if the city sold that property, that it could be developed. And I think that's covered, I believe, in the overlay. Is that right?
It would be, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know what the specific, as we've only ever had the bell tower site come in. and the
That's right.
fourth
That-
spec-
Yes.
Yeah, but there are very specific requirements for each site within the fourth special review district.
I'll add a quick anecdote. Based on the special review district guidelines, technically it is developable. But in this community meetings we've had, specifically with our neighbors in the Volker lofts, they made an interesting point about living in that building and seeing the development of the children's playground. And what a resident had said that they were very encouraged about where that playground was built in relation to the parking lot, because it basically ensured that that land wouldn't be developed.
Chances are slim.
Any?
We're at a concept level design, correct? What's the likelihood of keeping this very tracery light concrete ribbon ramp? Has that been thought about? I mean, I think my fear is if this goes further in design and suddenly we end up with a really bulky truss structure underneath, or are we gonna be able to keep this with like minimal structure? Is that the intent?
That's a great question. We have pretty exhaustively worked with the structural engineer of record on this, and a team of 4 engineers who Matt wanted to be sure that anything that we show and propose will be constructed. It's been priced, and it's been advanced far enough into design, but certainly we want to retain that flexibility because we want all of this feedback.
Okay,
But we're confident that what we're showing is feasible and constructible.
okay, so A, your structural engineer hates you. And B, this is probably pretty close to what the final intent is,
Yes.
Okay.
If approved.
if approved, if approved.
They are hard to find, Andy, but there are creative structural engineers out there.
I just remember, I wasn't part of the project, and I know we're getting off track, but the thin ribbon up at Red Rocks went through several rounds. Yep, okay.
Any further questions for the applicant? Jim?
Didn't we review at some point a preliminary design for the property that abuts the creek on the, I guess that's the north side, or
That's-
southwest side?
Down here,
Screen, Jim? Right.
below the bridge.
Below the bridge, yeah.
Yes,
I think we had agreed on things that the fire department wanted. I think we blessed all of those. There's obviously a bunch of other things that are now impacted by what we approved. And there's some things that were not included.
I don't know specifically about the fire department stuff because that was originally Jen's project. But Jesse recently brought it back to the commission for additional phase 2 review. So they're making some minor modifications to it because of converting it from what was initially all office or some mixed use to now all residential. So I imagine that will be coming through the permitting process soon.
But one of the things that does concern me a bit was that in effect, as I remember, and this is going from memory, which is fallible, of course, the material, the stuff on the south side of the bridge for at least half a block was to be considered as fire department access only.
I
And that'll,
I'm not sure about
it's a
that.
detail that will have to be looked at some point. because there was some argumentative stuff that went on during that. And Chris, that you may be aware of that or not.
Yeah,
I can't,
yes.
obviously my memory's not that
Well,
good.
Jim, I'm glad you brought that up. And he's making a note of that right now. And we'll, I might add that we are working with the Oz team on the building that's proposed across the creek. So we'll be coordinating with Oz and East West about how that new bridge that is adjacent to Manning's Bridge, how that connects and how the circulation, bike circulation.
Yeah, and that would be part of it.
Yeah.
Okay. And I guess the other thing is, I'm still confused because I'm not a hydrologist at all. But if the Platte River is going to be lowered 20 feet, which I've heard as a guideline, how does that impact what happens upstream in Cherry Creek? Or does it?
Yeah, I worked on the South Platte project.
Okay.
The hydrology is just dedicated to the Platte River, doesn't have an impact to Cherry Creek. That would be if someone was doing a project or proposing a project in Cherry Creek, they would have to get a separate CLOMR and permit for that hydrology study.
So it's probably not likely to happen,
Correct.
at least in our lifetimes. Thank you. That helps because I had a whole string of questions after that about the Platte Valley Trolley and the Children's Museum.
Right.
All that stuff.
Understood.
As I recall, Chris, I think you were involved in this. There was some question as to how much of what the landfill's made up of on the west side of that, and how permeable that is to water seepage and erosion, that sort of thing. And the conclusion was that it was probably pretty solid stuff. That's why the railroad had built over there in the first place.
That's right.
And wasn't likely to be moved. So we'll see. If that
We're going
issue
back
taken care of.
quite a few years there. There are probably only 2 people in this room who remember that, but you're right. Yeah, that's.
The last point on the floodplain issue is that, there's the South Platte River project looks to solve the floodplain impact across English Gardens and Ball Arena property. Interestingly, the first phase that we're proposing here, the bridge and the buildings in the first phase are out of the floodplain.
Okay. One last issue there. Is that whole reconstruction subject to a lot of redevelopment on the west side of the river, as opposed to, or is that even included in your scope? I don't know that.
It's not included in our scope, but the River Mile plan proposes 2 pedestrian bridges, which connects over
Plus
there,
highway
which makes
bridge.
that open space actually finally usable.
Yeah, finally.
Yes,
Okay, good. For other than parking lot.
rather than parking lot.
Thank you.
What's the closest the paperclip gets to Manning's Bridge horizontally?
It's,
Look at a plan.
the closest is the right way to pose that question because it varies.
Yep.
I don't have the
Yeah,
exact.
we generally try to keep a minimum of 6 feet clearance from any existing structure.
Okay.
Including this bridge.
Minnie's Bridge and the Volker Garage, right? Yes. And then,
And again, conceptual, but the theory there is that a width of a sidewalk to be able to have clearance between anything, but also the visual impact as well.
Approximately,
Say
the
it.
width of the circulation ribbon.
of the ribbon is 18 feet? Yes. At its, well, not average, but it grows at what we described as the nose that projects over at 18 feet. Yes. So we have the stair that handles a lot of capacity and then the 18-foot pathway ribbon. paperclip, corkscrew.
Your guardrails are rendered as a transparent material. Is that intended to be the what you're carrying forward? Not going to some sort of metal
I would
picket or?
say conceptually to evoke that it isn't going to be transparent and light, but not glass necessarily.
Any other questions? Any members of the public wishing to make a comment? Anybody online?
If you're online, you can press *9 if you're on your phone, or raise your hand if you're on the Zoom app. She's scared. I know, she's gonna comment.
Okay, nobody online? No one in person?
So
You
last
wanna
question,
say?
and this might be back to staff if that's okay, or it could be for the applicant. Is Manny's Bridge considered a character defining feature within the district? Is it actually called out as contributing feature?
Don't know.
Yeah, I don't know off the top of my head.
It's a good question. We can investigate.
Okay, because that could weigh into conversation.
Great. There's no
There
more,
was some work done with the lighting that went on that bridge, and that may give you some of that answer. 'Cause that bridge has lighting on it.
We'll definitely look into it, but I don't think either of us know off the top of our head.
Yeah, I looked into the packet and it wasn't conclusive. It just said historic bridge, but I think we fall into the trap of anything over a certain age becomes historic, but whether or not it's actually in the ordinances.
Yeah, we'll probably have to look at the National Register to dig into that.
It's probably not in the ordinance.
Okay.
Not called out as such.
well, if there are no further questions, so open us up for discussion. Curious to see what everybody thinks. Fred,
Sure.
you always look like you have something to say.
I'm always happy to be first, as I've taught and sat there while everybody kind of goes, oh, you first. So a couple of things. One is that I very much look forward to the presentation about the work that the city's doing on Spear Cherry Creek visioning, because I think that context will be very important for us as we consider this. I do have concerns about the developability of the site where the paperclip is proposed. It has one access, and I think you have to wonder where that conversation would go with DFD long range. So that leads me to think that a civic public serving piece of infrastructure like this becomes very appropriate on that site, because I'm not sure that we're going to do much better otherwise than a parking lot. I think, we're going to get in eventually to design details and all of that. And I recognize that this is conceptual, so I'm not going to dive into that at all, because I think that'll come down the road. But I think what's important to me is the issues of connection and the relationships and things like words like celebrate the creek experience and maintain physical and visual connections to the creek, consider the importance of connectivity. And that leads me to kind of think about what happens on the other side of Spear Boulevard, because I think even though that's not technically within our remit, it is part of what we have to consider. I always have a bit of concern with pedestrian overpasses over roads, because I think it's to a certain extent throwing up one's hands and saying, well, we can't do anything about the cars. And that's kind of folding on a very important question. But I'm also not convinced that anything is going to happen meaningfully to change that circumstance in the next decade or two. And so I recognize the urgency to get something done. And I also want to acknowledge that I think we've seen, just anecdotally, if you're in Lodo, you see the impact of a safe pedestrian route from Union Station to an attraction. And we see that on baseball game days. And on the other hand, heading the other direction, we see people trying to find their way and people trying to find ways to safely cross Spear, and it sucks. And so I salute that. But I do want to just say that because we are talking about connection and how important that is, I do get a little bit concerned that the other side looks a little bit canyon-like. And you spoke about it and the importance of this connection from downtown all the way across to the stadium and the neighborhoods on the other side. And I just want to throw that out there, that I worry a little bit that the other side looks a lot more like a canyon than a plaza. But I also have, ongoing concerns about what it does to our city and our pedestrian realm if we lift all of the pedestrian activity above grade and kind of call it art. So I'm just throwing that out there. One thing that I think will be very helpful from my perspective as we consider these things about the relationship to the creek and visual connections and perceptions of scale and character within the special review district, it would be helpful when this comes back to get some pedestrian views from the bridge. I think that would help me to understand how this and how the experience of that bridge relates to the creek, relates to the historic district. Because I think that's very important. So those are my initial comments. Thank you.
I'll go. I really appreciate though how the paperclip is it's a nice termination of the children's park and the plaza that's just across the following street. The language of the landscaping of the children's park does feel like it's compatible with the paperclip. I feel that the scale of it, if we look at it in isolation of just within the special review district, does feel a little overwhelming. But when taken in context as you bleed out to the new construction across the creek and then the proposed construction and the bridge itself, it starts to make more sense. But that scale question is where I start to have more questions, especially as it relates to Manny's Bridge, and immediately what that pedestrian experience would be as you come down Wynkoop, cross the creek, and make your way up. Does this paperclip start to feel, even though we're trying to make it light, does it start to overwhelm some of the existing elements, such as Manny's Bridge? So when we see this again, I would love I think the pedestrian views, or maybe there's a way to just touch the geometry slightly, although I appreciate the axial relationship of that nose. So anyway, that's initial thoughts there. And then I would love to understand more how this paperclip and then the bridge just beyond it serve as a visual terminus for the Wynkoop corridor. So a view of that, because again, afraid that the paperclip might overwhelm the bridge and the beautiful splay that happens. So would love just to see how that helps to terminate our district.
I think, it's an elegant design with appropriate, continuity between the design of this arch and the other Spear arches. I think it would be really nice to see a comparison of the scale of this arch relative to maybe the other existing arches. But I mean, I think, what you're proposing, given that occupancy load that you're trying to meet and everything, is probably very necessary. And I really appreciate, the graceful curve of and the lightness of it, relative to, it's just a nice juxtaposition of the historic buildings. I'm an avid cyclist, so I appreciate any, cycling path that can be utilized. That acute turn worried me at first, but if it's 18 feet wide, it's not quite so acute. I think it's a very nice proposal. And I think it's fine, it would be nice, like you said, to see the distance between Manny's Bridge and that paperclip. In plan, it looks potentially like it's within 10 feet or so, but it's hard to
tell. Overall, I appreciate the elegance of the simplicity and the linear nature of the bridge in relation to kind of our typically what we think of in Lodo is kind of the boxy square buildings. I do think there is a good concern about whether or not Manny's Bridge is considered a character defining feature. If it is, I think the paperclip is encroaching a little too much. I think I'd like to have some breathing room. That said, if Manning's Bridge is not considered a character defining feature, I like the juxtaposition of the two. I like the tension between the two. So it goes two ways. If Manning's Bridge is a character defining feature, I think we need to pull back a little bit. If Manning's Bridge is kind of considered not a character defining feature of the district, then I like that tension. So it depends on what Brittany and her group finds out. So I know, take through your files and see what we can find. I do like the thin ribbon of concrete that we're looking at, because I think that is kind of again, that dichotomy between the stocky nature of Lodo in relation to more the modern streamlined nature of the proposal. I think a lot of times when we see historic districts, people try to be too matchy-matchy. The other way to go is be as different as possible. And I think that's what I appreciate with this proposal, is that it's not trying to match too much. In fact, it's not trying to match at all. It's trying to say, that is you, this is us. But at the same time, I feel like the scale fits with, again, just looking at the paperclip, fits in what we have. I think there's some things to look at with the nosing and the heights and that, but I think a lot of that comes down into the grades you have to meet with ADA's national parks, ADA and cyclists.
Comment. This is a lot of fun. I didn't even know, it's brand new to me. I had no knowledge of this. I hadn't had a chance to look at the plans. This group here is key. They're really good. And from a contractor's point of view, these guys know what they're doing. And Fred has a history there that's amazing. So I'm just soaking it in. And first look at it, looks great. I think that what you're gonna do about that, getting the people from A to B, is well done. It's necessary. I've got a couple of thoughts here. One is, you may be aware already of the undercurrent of the merchants along Winecoop Street that are saying, leave the damn street alone, close it. And that is a pretty powerful suggestion of a lot of folks along Winecoop, particularly from, say 21st. I know that street doesn't exist, at least up to the exit off the interstate. And that's been one that looks quite practical, even as part of the 5280 thing. So that's one that is getting a life of its own, and may have a part in it. Winecoop is a very overused street right now. It's just tremendously over capacity almost any time of day, particularly if you go down there at 5 p.m. and you try to find a parking space. We've already told people, don't even try to park in front of our building. Just let it be, find another place for it. In fact, several folks in the building who've gotten rid of their cars or second cars just say, park and use our space. Go inside the building, use the space there. If you look at what Dana at one time proposed, she had done some calculation. I don't know how accurate it is, but it was something to the effect that if you took all of the Union Station Plaza and added the street to it, it was pretty close to, what was it, St. Mary's Square in Rome? St. Somebody's Square.
That's always been her vision.
Yeah, and that was part of why we should maybe consider making Winecoop pretty much of a pedestrian-oriented street. That particular intersection of Winecoop and 17th, Winecoop and 17th is also one that it's usually ranked as one of the safest in the city. Why? Because everyone comes to a complete halt before they dare to make a movement on it. And you know, people don't believe me when I say it, they don't believe me in a lot of things. But that's one where it is definitely one of the safest intersections in the whole city. And it's because everyone does make a full stop before they dare to enter the intersection. I do it with this thing. So just a couple things to keep in mind that are details at this point and are small details that I think really need to be considered. And I think there's a way of doing that without affecting the continuity or the travelability, to coin a word, of the 5280 plan. So pass that along. But I agree with the suggestions we've heard here, and I like the way the project is moving. Thank you.
I have another small comment, and it is a little bit of a nitpicky just to kind of think about, but I'm looking at the paperclip in plan and how it attaches to the rest and how it meets the rest. And I worry a little bit and hope that you'll do some walkthroughs on it about pedestrian bike conflict there. Because it seems to be coming in at a right angle, right at the top of the stairs. And that's not going to be nice. So just a little something to consider.
That's a good point. Even if that angle was like splayed out more,
Yeah.
then you could transition in. But you know, when you're transitioning up in a bike, you're gonna head to the right side, so you're crossing circulation typically.
Where, can I respond to that, or is that not?
It's the chairs. It's a discussion item and we're not taking it.
I think that's a yes. Well, it's a great comment. We had earlier schemes that where there was an extremely fluid transition. We were a little concerned that that would encourage bicyclists to speed through that. We are continuing to look at it. It's a careful balance. We find this often in parking garages where you make it so safe and so wide that cars actually speed through the garage. So there's, it's intentional at this point that we are creating a pinch point. However, we can have people falling over on their bikes. So it's a great comment, and we're continuing to study how to get people to slow down, to come together so that they do slow down, but also to allow a safe transition.
Because the stair is so adjacent to that ramp that if you were a cyclist and you weren't really paying attention and there's not a good visual of the stair, you might accidentally turn right.
Yeah, that would be tough.
If your vision that this really does eventually connect across to the stadium district, et cetera, comes to fruition, I think this is going to end up becoming potentially a very important cycle route, frankly.
Yes.
And so I think you need to, not just look at it as access from downtown to the concert venue to Ball Arena, but it's going to be a through route.
Yeah.
Potentially.
If I could add to that, this team gets very excited about the connections that Ball will provide as part of the development, which we all know connections are so important in cities. You will be able to ride a bike from Sun Valley over CML, the Platte River, through Ball and over this connection, over this crossing, without crossing the street. And that's plus you're connected to the Greenway system, which has now become Denver's freeway for bicycles. And so that's the bigger picture that we didn't discuss today, but it's the bigger picture that we talk about and have talked about as we've done all the planning for these two projects.
And I think there's this ongoing discussion that we have with 5280 about the 5280 really isn't a bike path. It's not really designed for commuters. And that's great, but I suspect that this is going to become an important commuting route. And so, you may want to really rethink that in terms of slowing people down. I mean, you're going to need to keep them safe, but at the same time, it's going to be a through route. So you might as well acknowledge that now and design for it, as opposed to everybody being irritated with it after the fact.
Yeah, just as important to think about, the 7:45 on a Tuesday as the midnight Taylor Swift lets out.
Yes.
One final thing, pay attention to scooters, because while they're not a big issue most places in the city, they are a huge issue downtown. And they're not exactly all friendly.
Well said.
Any other thoughts, comments? I think we all look forward to kind of next steps and kind of reiterate, I think that what staff had mentioned and the LPC had mentioned, that kind of a joint working meeting, a joint presentation, I think would be really welcomed on something like this. I think it's a bit unprecedented on how many overlays of approvals it needs to get. So yeah, if that's a doable, feasible thing, I think that would be welcomed by this commission.
This has been a substantive review, very helpful to us. This is what design review should be. Thank you.
There's nothing further. We have nothing else on our agenda today, nothing further from staff.
Just a reminder that our next meeting is January 4th, with the potential overflow on the 11th. Again, we're trying to coordinate to see if we can have a joint meeting. So if we do that, we'll probably, because the LBC meets on Tuesday, we'll probably have to coordinate with you guys a little bit. But you guys meet at wildly different times also, so they meet at 1, you guys meet at 8:30, so we'll do our best to coordinate with you to address that. And it does look like we will have maybe some agenda items on the 4th, so if you could plan on being here, that would be great. And still trying to fill the one vacant position, as many of you heard this morning. So that's it.
Well, with that, you said the 4th is our meeting and then the 11th is the meeting that we might collaborate on.
No, the 11th is our overflow meeting
Oh,
that we have. If we have a extra agenda item, or we potentially don't have quorum at our first meeting of the month.
And we wouldn't be doing collaboration till
Yeah.
several more months down, once we're actually getting designs in. And the LPC did request that it come in as a 2-part. It'll come in as a mass form and context and a design detail.
Feels to me like we're doing both of those jointly.
Yeah.
Even if we then take separate votes, which just
Which you would.
avoids so much.
I think we may need a tally system and be able to see what other people are saying, just to be like, okay, we're aligned. Yeah, because that's my biggest fear, is because this is so many overlays. This is probably a discussion, I don't know if it's better now or later, but my concern is the conflicting,
It's gonna be conflicting feedback.
yeah, and
Yeah.
I'm gonna pull from a former chair that we know is the fewer conditions, the better, because I think that's where we get into trouble.
Yeah.
We haven't asked about view quarters at all, but I know they're starting to arise as a significant issue among certain people living on both sides of the bridge.
I would recommend, since that applicant has left, not to, if there are any further comment, we save them to later for the bridge. But if there are any question about the meetings,
But if we're gonna badmouth LBC, we can do that.
I mean, I wish you would. As 2 of you have been
As a
on the-
former LPC, that was a jest.
Yeah.
Well, with that, I hope everybody has a wonderful end of the year, holiday, happy new year. And I am adjourning the meeting at 9:48.
Thank y'all.
Thank you.
Last meeting of 2023.
Hey.
We did
Need to wrap
it.
it up.